We are here with Christine from IFRS Law. Welcome, Christine.
Hello, Lizette. How are you?
I'm very well, and you?
Good, thank you.
So in our previous video, I talked about an LLC and what we need to know before we start an LLC. Now, Christine, could you tell us, how do I know if my company is a properly formed LLC or a corporation, and what is the difference?
Okay, so that's a pretty broad question, so I might have to ask you another question just to clarify what you're looking for in terms of, guidance. So generally speaking, formation begins with documents, right? Filing documents with appropriate authority to show that this is my business, this is the name, this is who's involved. And so whether or not those documents are properly filed, a good suggestion is to file a form that whoever you're filing the paperwork with. A lot of times in Arizona, it's the Arizona Corporation Commission. Sometimes it's the Secretary of State. Usually it's something with the word corporation in it or company. And in the United States here, each state has their state entity. And sometimes there's a local authority too that you may have to file a business license and so forth with. But I can tell you, generally speaking, your local chamber of commerce or your state business registration website will provide forms for you to fill out. Now, whether or not the information you put in there is correct, you may need to have, a professional, and sometimes there are CPAs or attorneys that work with small businesses just to review the information. You can put it together and that will save costs. But if you really want to verify that the document is going to serve the purpose that you want it to and be formed correctly, because that's the idea of either forming a corporation or a business, is to provide a shield for yourself so your personal assets aren't exposed in the event, something goes wrong and somebody has to sue the business rather than you personally. But that's a whole other ball of, whole other bottle of worms that we don't want to open up. But that's something we could talk about at another time in terms of making sure your assets are protected and that your documents say the right things. Now, your second question was the difference between the two. Generally, with corporations, just as a general, are shareholders. So there's going to be more than, you can have a corporation that is just one individual. You can have an LLC that's just one individual. But with corporations and before LLC is like a new sort of entity formation just in the last, I think they began in Wyoming probably in the early 80s and 70s. Before that corporation or sole proprietor was the only general forms of business entities. So, but the LLC is relatively easy to set up. With the corporation, you have a little bit more obligation in terms of annual meetings and filings with the state. The LLC, for the most part, in most jurisdictions, there's not a lot of annual filings. You do have to make sure, if there's fees to be paid on an annual basis. Here in Arizona, there's a really low threshold of the documents that you need to file on an annual basis. But each state is different. I guess that's the important thing, is to go to your business registration website for the state where you are and look at their requirements and look at their forms. And that will give you at least some initial guidance. And then I would suggest, if you really want to check to make sure whatever you've prepared is correct, have it reviewed by a professional that does help small businesses.
Okay, thank you so much. That is so helpful to know. Definitely, that's a bigger, broader conversation, because I never realized there's so much to it. So yes, that's really interesting. Okay, so our next question would be how to protect my company's intellectual property.
Okay, so there's lots of different forms of intellectual property. There's the business name. There's if you're using a special product with a special name. I think you had mentioned before inventions. If there's actual property that you sometimes we call intangible property when it's a license or other things. Generally speaking, when we're talking about like a business name, and this is one thing that you want to do before you register your business, is to check to make sure that business name is available, so you're not infringing on somebody else's intellectual property. And you can register your name, your business name, by state and with the federal authorities if you wanted to have federal protection of that name. But if you just register with the state, that still allows somebody in a different state to register that name. Now, and that protects it in one way, but if we're been using a name for a while, there's what we call a common law protection. And if you can show, like, for example, you've had a website for a long period of time, that provides some protections. But when you register a name with the state authorities, or for example, the US Patent and Trademark Office, which is the federal authorities, that provides more protection, so that if somebody does infringe upon or take your intellectual property or use it, you would be able to pursue legal remedies that would allow for attorney's fees and so forth. So it just depends on what it is that you want to protect. And I'll always say this, speaking, if it's something that is valuable to you and you want to ensure protection, you should speak with someone, a professional that does focus on intellectual property, which would be a lawyer.
Oh, okay. That makes perfect sense. I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners are thanking you for this insight at the moment. So my last question, what sort of employment procedures and records should a small business owner have in place?
Well, it depends on the type of business, but generally speaking, in terms of employees, for example, and for, if you have equipment and, computers, whatever it is that, you're using for your small business, insurance, ideally, and a sufficient amount of insurance. And then as far as employees, you want to make sure that all the obligations that you have the documentation in place, relative to tax reporting, relative to unemployment insurance. And then for your in-house kinds of documents, depending, you may want to have a confidentiality agreement or some other agreement to make sure your employees follow the procedures that you want them to follow, and they sign off on that. And usually, that can be in the form of an offer letter to that potential employee and say, okay, these are your responsibilities. This is what the expectations are. If there are some key productivity indicators that you're expecting on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, so they really understand exactly what their obligation is, and that can help inform, the 30-day review and so forth, and going forward and inform if there's going to be a bonus because they exceeded those. So those are the types of things that, come to mind relative to, as far as employees. But the same thing would go with vendors. You want to make sure you have a proper agreement in place for, for what is going to be kept as far as the business's ownership. The website, if somebody's helping you set up a website, you own that website. You want to make sure an agreement says that it's not, something that's hosted on, whatever the platform, whoever's helping you. You want to make sure you keep your rights to whatever's been created and what you're paying for. And that goes with anything.
Okay, that's excellent. Now we know what we have to have in place for an LLC and how to know if it's a properly formed one and what the difference is between a corporation and an LLC. So everybody be sure to check out our next video where we will be answering some more important questions to set your mind at ease. Thank you so much for your time, Christine, and may you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Lizette. I always appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And remember, the information provider does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information is for general informational purposes only. The information may not constitute the most up-to-date information. Links provided are only for the convenience of the reader. IFRS Law LLC and its members do not endorse the contents of the third-party references. And also, please like, subscribe, and follow our channel for more.